Gotta be real with you, today's story's a pretty darn frustrating one. I've got to start it off with a quote. Here's the quote. "The quarter's game releases have not held the quality we want." That is the verdict of Paradox CEO Frederick Wester during their end-of-year report, where he's reflecting on the frustrations the players had with City Skylines 2 at launch. Now, the release of City Skylines 2 is certainly profitable for Paradox, but looking at the numbers and the way that Paradox are now talking about it to investors, it's pretty darn clear that they are now happy to sandbag the game's reception as a mistake being made with lessons learned. But that doesn't change the fact that analysis actually suggests that City Skylines 2 was rushed out to paper over cracks of a weak quarter for the company. Because, as you all know, at any cost, the line must go up. When ours does, it means job security, it means pay rises, not this bullshit. And by the way, you can help our line with today's sponsor. Right, here's the deal. It's time for America to do a politics. So, as we watch on, I'm going to be using ground.news/Bellular to satisfy my current affairs interests, while also not being confused, misled, bamboozled, woozled, and all of that stuff. You see, Ground exists to give you power over the news. And given this year's agenda, I think that's important. Close to our realm, though, it turns out that one of 2024's protagonist character, Sam Altman, is pushing really hard. He wants trillions worth of new AI chip investment. Now, we can see that most of the sources are center biased, some are left biased, and barely any are right biased, so it's undercovered towards the right. Of the sources, half are high factuality, most of the rest are mixed, and a few are low. And we can even see a breakdown of the ownership of these sources, and there's a feature I love in particular here. Seeing actually who broke the story in this little timeline. It's brilliant. To be a bit more qualitative though, Ground makes it so easy to compare headlines from the left, the center, and the right, so you can see who's putting what spin on, who's being a bit more sensationalist, and they've got a real neat tool that summarizes the story and gives you bias insights. It's amazing. Now, personally, I do keep up with current affairs. I care about the state of things. I'm interested in the world, and I know in the past that, well, there's times I've been misled by just assuming a headline or a TLDR is accurate. So Ground gives me the tool so I can work out what's up for myself, and at ground.news/Bellular, that's where you can get started. Subscriptions, right, start at less than $1 a month, or you can get 30% off unlimited access this month using my link. A big thanks to Ground, who are coming up on their 1-year anniversary of supporting the show. I know that sponsor segue was a bit blunt, but damn if it ain't true, that's where the beans go. Okay, let's talk about things. Per their financial report, City Skylines 2 sold 1 million copies. That's really good. It helped them to drive revenues, even though what they had to do was eat a lovely operating loss from the writing off of Lamplighters League, because Lamplighters League did not do very well. It does seem that it wasn't exactly cheap to make. Overall then, revenues are great. I mean, actually, take a look. They are the highest that they've been in quarters, and thinking about the line, obviously, the line that we all live by, operating profits have not dropped below it. Now, yes, it's a quarterly drop, sure, but it's nowhere near as bad as it could have been. So you might think, all right, there's some wins, there's some losses, whatever, we'll move on to the next quarter, try to be happy. But what is even more curious is what, yes, Mr. Frederick Wester said on the reception of the game. We really didn't meet player expectations when it comes to performance or the releasing consoles, which of course didn't happen. Some of the functionalities, including modding, was lacking as well, where yes, they weren't able to ship with mods. And just so you're caught up in that, by the way, City Skylines is just an incredibly modded game. There is even drama around that, where the modding would be happening like on a Paradox modding platform rather than in Steam Workshop. Now, they said that's because they want to unify everything between console and PC, which I do understand, but for a lot of people, Steam Workshop's pretty damn handy, right? And for a game like City Skylines, it's extremely important. It's a sort of game that I would say is multiplicative in creativity. It's the idea that the more different types of Lego blocks you give a player, you're not just adding new things that they could build, you're almost multiplying them because of how the possibility space expands. And that's one of the reasons why mods, even just custom assets, if you want to make, say, a British city for some reason, I guess, yeah, is like that. He said, "We still sold well because the underlying game is really good. So we sold over 1 million copies after the end of the quarter. We're now working really hard on improving things, including performance, and we are going to develop the game for many years to come. City Skylines 2 is one of our long-term engagements and one of our most important franchises as well." Now, this is with the specific framing of, quote, "the quarter's game releases have not held the quality that we want." Now, that is partially referring to the Lamplighters League. It's also referring to smaller titles like Star Trek Infinite, the sales of which were certainly not. Essentially, it was inspired by a really, really big mod for Stellaris, but it's one of those things where, you know, you do it officially and it turns out you don't really hold parity with the mod, and then people are kind of like, okay, well, this is the official version, but it's worse. Why have you done this? I think the idea of, if you're going to do it, fully do it, but also it's very, very hard to compete with modders, actually, and maybe that's something we'll talk about another day. Anyway, what this is really referring to, though, is City Skylines 2. It's a game that Paradox chose to release, and that's why this is getting to be its own video, because the point here, everything that Mr. Wester is saying is sort of the fault of him and his board, or, you know, whoever the key decision makers are. Yeah, kind of their fault, and we're going to get into that. So these rough results, I mean, a 75 average is good, but only half recommending, and certainly if you took a look at YouTube, pretty much everyone is saying, look, there's great potential here, but don't buy it right now. And even with all of that, it still did pretty well. I mean, come on, city builders, they've been pretty, pretty strong these days, even with some very negative, user criticisms, pretty disastrous Steam review scores. Ultimately, for many, like, yeah, you might have criticisms, but the thing that matters is if the line goes up, and they did get sales. The thing, though, is the criticisms are still mounting. Content creators and fans are losing patience because Colossal Order are still trying to actually catch their momentum again. This is one of the massive problems that you have, and we've talked about it before with live service games. Take, say, Anthem, right? Or any of those live services where the game comes out and it's effectively so scuffed that they've got to start delaying the actual live service seasons because they need to fix up the game first. Or an example like Halo Infinite, where they released the game and then they said, okay, bit of a problem, guys. We are not set up to actually run the live service that Microsoft have tasked us with running. Therefore, what we need to do is sort of rebuild our team, our processes, our pipelines, and then by the time, of course, they actually do get caught up, guess what happens? People have moved on to something else, and sadly Halo Infinite did not do as well as it should have. The core game improvements and the modding tools are not out yet, and the reason why is, well, unfortunately the developers have been stuck fixing launch problems. The thing is, if your launch happens when you are ready and as you have planned, what happens? Well, your immediate future after that launch is going to be a lot more certain, because guess what? You've not had to spend ages firefighting problems. And the thing is, this is an instance where they chose to release this game when they did. There is, we're going to look at the balance sheet and the stonks, because we all do love the line and whether it goes up or down, but there's also change that they have implemented for future titles here. Now, just to give a sort of get a temperature of that community and the sort of lost potential here, Biffa is one of the people who does a lot of city builder content, a lot of City Skylines. The guy's got thousands of hours. It is totally his jam. Now, in a recent video he released, he was chatting about how, a lot of people in the content creation scene were kind of thinking okay, big new game, I guess our numbers will go up, and they haven't actually found that as much. And it was interesting going through Biff's video. I mean, number one, he speaks about how a lot of the deep simulation systems that exist, it's they exist, but they don't matter. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how much complexity is there under the hood if the result is effectively the same. So he's had a lot of issues on game tuning, essentially, and this is always the problem that runs into me with park sim games and sort of city games. It's probably why the likes of a Frostpunk probably suits me more, but you just end up with money being absolutely no obstacle. But then the problem is, when that's left over, he's saying, well, as somebody who's super into this series, who does themed builds, where a lot of those themed builds will actually help drive him in YouTube, basically he's yeah, well, we don't have the mods. There is not much that we can do. So even within the City Skylines sort of creator scene, well, they're actually very limited in what they can do because there's so little, sort of content and diversity there. He goes on to talk about, views and that kind of thing, where people would have expected, big new entry in the franchise, way more views. Or maybe people would have expected, big drama, way more views. You actually take a look on Social Blade, and the scales are a bit messed up here just because of how these, count some things if you end up deleting content in a channel. But anyway, you can see he's kind of in the sort of the 2 million to 3 million range. And yeah, it does bump up to 4 million in and around launch. And then it does all just kind of go right back down again. And it just sort of shows you've had your big new release, but what are people actually playing? What are they interested in? Now, if we actually zoom out to do a different comparison, you start to see the sort of damage done to the community. So number one, City Skylines 2. Well, this certainly is not line go up. This is line go down. 100,000 players on launch. That's sitting, right now, 6,600 as I said. So that's pretty rough. Thing is though, when we go and take a look at the original game City Skylines, we actually see, so this is a far, larger graph. Look at January 2023, 41,000 players. You can see the game's really doing well there. We keep on going. By September 2023, so that's when the new game's coming out, you're dealing with, peak players of 34, 35,000. Of course, this is a time where people will have had, loads of preview videos for City Skylines 2. That'll probably make them think, I'll give the old game, one more shot. And then even this number dwindles and dwindles and dwindles to the point where in December 2023, its peak is 16,000. And you would think December, holidays, playing, sort of city sim game, all just sort of seems to make sense. But no, you just see that these numbers have actually dwindled and real damage has been done to this brand. Now, let's take a look at some of the financial stuff. So I've got three things here. I've got 250 million Swedish krona into USD. That will become relevant later. I've got Paradox's stocks, and I've got their earnings report. So if you actually look at their stonks, you can see if you go back to 5 years, number one, look at that, August 2023, 307 krona for one stock, and look at that absolutely humongous drop that happens through September and October. And when we zoom in on that a little bit more, you see August 2023, stuff's looking pretty good. I suppose a lot of those, the market wasn't quite in its very dire state that it's, at least the sort of chatter about games, it's not in the dire state that it's in very much right now. And you can see what happens. So we see that go down. Obviously, things are looking pretty rough. We've got Lamplighters League to talk about. Now, on the 11th of October, we see the write-down for that game. Well, that sends, of course, the line down even further. The impact of Lamplighters League before, on profit, before tax, is minus 250 million Swedish krona, which does turn out to be about 24 million USD. So, yeah, that's all kind of rough. And of course, while this was announced, when it was announced, they pretty much would have known that there was problems quite a bit ago. So overall, pretty rough. Really bad announcement on the 11th of October, and for some reason they say, okay, well, they look at City Skylines 2, and they think, right, that's fine, we can continue with this plan. And I get that there's a degree of sunk cost whenever you're ramping up for a marketing strategy. You've already had it in the hands of all the influencers and the press and all of that for ages, but ultimately, you still can say, nope, this is not going to be good. They did not have to release that quarter. They wanted to, because as they say, it is one of their company's core brands, and with that, they could at least guarantee some sales that would balance out the risk of the smaller titles like Star Trek Infinite or very large write-offs like that of Lamplighters League. So ultimately, those who wanted a city manager were in fact victims of them playing a balance sheet manager, which is unfortunate. Now, there's a little bit of good news here in that they have kind of learned. So, Lives by You is their competitor to The Sims. It's from Paradox to Tonic, and it's been delayed again, right? It was scheduled for launch in September 2023. So imagine that. September, you got Stellaris, September would have been Lamplighters, and this game followed up in October by, City Skylines 2, which was pretty much a disaster in its launch. And I've heard some real rumbly things about how Paradox have ran just some other projects as well, with being pretty damn mercenary, but like to the point where it's kind of them hurting themselves. Maybe things truly have changed, but could you imagine how much of a disaster that quarter would have been if they really did all of that? But now it's going to be June 2024. What do we make out of this? Because this is a game that had the same release window as what, as roughly when City Skylines 2 was going to come out. I mean, when should Skylines 2 have been delayed? Maybe another year? I mean, you've got the likes of, say, Biffa, who, I mean, yeah, he's really good at games like that because he's played them a lot, but he shouldn't be saying, yeah, actually, a lot of these new systems, the economy and stuff, they don't really matter. Well, maybe he wouldn't be saying that if this game had enough time in the oven. So anyway, Lives by You, it was initially delayed by 6 months to March, and then it's been delayed for another 3 months now to June. And it's kind of hard to look at this and not see it as a direct response to how much damage the City Skylines situation did to them. They say that their decision to move the start of early access is rooted in their commitment in creating a fun game and enjoyable player experience right from the start of early access. Cool. I suppose that's just not a commitment that they were going to be offering to the City Skylines 2 players, who of course went in and rescued them from their Lamplighters League right down. Anyway, cool. Do you know what really sucks here, right? The developers of this game have been put into a really hard situation. I mean, they've had, a lot of toxicity, a lot of craziness, because look, there's lots of players who are not expressing themselves in the most constructive way. Who's really at fault here? Well, it's probably the people who are rushing the games out early, thus meaning the developers don't have the time to do their job. It's really, making the devs' lives harder is only going to hurt. It is very much not helpful. We should squarely be focused on the people who actually, have the keys to power, who make the really big decisions, and in this case, that is Paradox Interactive. Wow. So yeah, maybe they'll learn their lesson, but it's very sad that a very large and usually really good gaming community had to suffer the way that it did. That is it for today's story. You can check out what we published yesterday after this one. Of course, we do publish daily. If you want to support the show, then one of the best ways to do that is to check out our sponsor. Okay, have a great day. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.